But no quarterback room is as wild as Cleveland's. They've added Shedeur Sanders. They brought back Joe Flacco. Also drafted Dylan Gabriel. They traded for Kenny Pickett. And Deshaun Watson's still on the roster. He's just recovering from yet another injury. We have been going division by division, grading every team's off-season moves. We hit the AFC North today. And Tyler Sullivan is going to be handing out the grades. We are going to start with the ever-interesting Cleveland Browns, who I think get an A+ for interest. I mean, I want to hear about them. I want to see them on Hard Knocks and all that stuff. But what do they get for what they've done on the field, Tyler?
Yeah, I give him a C+, and it's like a bad version of the Brady Bunch in that quarterback room, right? You're talking about the old head and Joe Flacco. You have Kenny Pickett, who is just kind of weirdly sitting around. And then when they brought in Dylan Gabriel at the NFL draft, you're like, okay, here it comes. They're completely out on Shedeur Sanders. And you get to the 5th round, and all of a sudden, who's the pick? It's Shedeur Sanders. The whole thing is just absolutely confusing. And to me, it says that they're kicking the quarterback decision down in 2026. Yes, they did bring in Shedeur, and that's the guy that everybody was thinking pre-draft could be their answer long-term. And sure, possibly that could be it if it plays out that way. But ultimately, the actions of the Cleveland Browns tell you that they don't view him as a legitimate starting quarterback in the NFL. If they did, they would have taken him in the 2nd round or somewhere in day 2. Who knows? Maybe even in the 1st round if they really wanted to after they traded down. But overall, this team is building for the future. They're adding on defense and Mason Graham with the number 5 overall pick. They're gaining assets by trading down. Overall, this team is not necessarily a contender in 2025. They're looking more towards 2026 and 2027.
The next team always feels like they're a contender. They never have a losing season. They're always in the mix. They always seem to overperform. It's the Pittsburgh Steelers. The question is, how can you even assess a grade at this point when the Aaron Rodgers question is still out there?
Yeah, exactly, right? I almost want to give him an incomplete here. I'll give him a C+ because overall, I do like what they were able to do. They finally were able to find a wide receiver, trading for DK Metcalf, signing him to that massive contract. But overall, who's throwing him the football? We're still sitting here in Aaron Rodgers purgatory, so it doesn't really matter what this team does. It doesn't matter if you go get DK Metcalf. It doesn't matter if you're making strides on the defensive side by drafting Derek Harmon, or you're kind of, you're getting Jack Sawyer late, who I really liked in the draft. If there's no quarterback here, and right now it's Mason Rudolph, who, I'm sorry, that just does not get me excited. That is the same scenario that you were in a season ago where you could barely get to 20 points per game, couldn't do it down the stretch. None of these additions really matter. So as much as I want to give them a higher grade, because I do like overall what they were able to do in certain respects, I just can't get excited about the Pittsburgh Steelers right now because I don't know who's going to be under center. We don't know what Aaron Rodgers is going to do. He's liable to sign with them the second I get off here, or he's liable to take this into week 10 somehow, and we still don't have a decision from him.
It's the first day of May. The very first preseason game is the last day of July, the Hall of Fame game. Let's go to the Cincinnati Bengals, who did what they could on offense. They brought back Chase on a big deal. They brought back Higgins on a big deal. But offense hasn't been the question. The question's on D, and there's still a big question mark for their best player on defense.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I give him a C here, and that's kind of crazy, right? Because you're like, okay, they signed T. Higgins. They signed Jamar Chase. They were able to bring the band back together for Joe Burrow on offense. But to me, this is the same exact team that we saw in 2024. And when we're trying to look at these grades, we're trying to answer the question of, did you get better from a season ago? And I look at this Cincinnati Bengals team and say, no, they're largely the same team. We don't know what's going to happen with Trey Hendrickson. That's still kind of the looming situation hovering over their heads. And he is the best defensive player they have. This team, the reason why they missed out on the postseason in 2024 was because of this defense. It didn't matter that they had Jamar Chase and T. Higgins, who, again, they were able to retain. Credit to them. Good for the ownership to pull out the money and keep those guys there. But overall, defensively, I still have major concerns concerned. Shamar Stewart in the first round has the tools to be a premier pass rusher in the NFL, but in college, he totaled 4.5 sacks. It's not like this is someone who they're going to bring in and instantly can be plug and play, and you know that he's going to be a game changer on the defensive side of the ball. There's some inherent risks there. So when we have questions about your first round draft pick on defense, we don't know about your best player on defense in Trey Hendrickson, I can't really give you more than a CC+.
And that's all you've given the 3 teams so far, a C and 2 C+. The last team, the Baltimore Ravens, you look, you don't see that they did a lot, but they've been better than all these other teams the last few years. Did they really need to do that much?
Right, and that's where we kind of grade on a curve a little bit, right? Where if you have drastic needs and you don't fill them, well, it's an ultimate failure. If you're a team like the Baltimore Ravens who are in their Super Bowl window, you don't really have to do too much. So I give them a B here because, again, you're kind of just picking on the outside corners of the roster. You bring in DeAndre Hopkins, who I do like. I have my concerns about him. Again, he's going to be 33 years old. He's dealt with some injuries over the last couple of years. Wasn't that impactful with Patrick Mahomes. So you ask the question, okay, if you're not good with Patrick Mahomes, what quarterback could you be good with? And obviously Lamar Jackson in his own right is one of the best quarterbacks in the league, so we'll see how that translates. But overall, I do like the addition of Malachi Starks. I like that they deployed the 5th-year option on Kyle Hamilton. Those two will really help that secondary that drastically needs it. We talk a lot about Cincinnati and their issues on the defensive side of the ball. Baltimore had just as many issues, at least at the beginning of the season, in the secondary. So if you're telling me that they've improved their secondary with Malachi Starks and obviously Kyle Hamilton being who he is, one of the best safeties in the NFL, this team should once again be contending in the AFC.
AFC North report card looks like mine from high school. C+ in algebra, C+ in science. Grader. I like it, though. Too many people are like, oh, let's give him a B. You know what? Let's just give him a B. No. Tyler Sullivan is a hard grader. He's like the nun I had in first grade, Sister Elia. Oof.
Sister what?
Elia. God rest her soul. She was 89 back in 1990. Amanda, you requested this promo.
Did not.
What would you like to say?
Promo. I mean, keep it right here on CBS Sports HQ. We literally have everything you need. Why would you ever change the channel?
And a lot of Jets talk.
We're going to move on from the Jets now. We're going to talk to one of our favorites here, Alex Smith, coming up. There's a lot to talk about. He's doing a new venture. We're going to talk about that. Also, his advice as a former #1 overall pick to another #1 overall pick. And what about the Shedeur Sanders slide?
Back here on CBS Sports HQ, you know, no division in all of football was better than the NFC North in 2024. All but the Bears won at least 10 games, but when it came to the postseason, neither the Lions, Vikings, or Packers were able to pick up any playoff wins. Chicago, meanwhile, had a year to forget behind first-year quarterback and former #1 overall pick in Caleb Williams. All 4 squads making changes, though, in the offseason. So let's see how our experts grade them ahead of the 2025 season. We are bringing back the boys, B-Mac and Danny Kanell. Guys, class is in session, so let's hand out some grades. We're going to get started with the Bears. They, I think, are the team with the most to improve on here. The biggest moves that we saw in the offseason was the O-line. They most notably brought in the 4-time Super Bowl champion Joe Thuney and a top center in Drew Dahlman. They also added some pieces for Caleb Williams in the draft to lean on. Professor B-Mac, I come to you because you gave them an A+ for the offseason. Tell us more.
Yes, Haley, DK, I'm usually a hard grader. So if I give you an A+, you earned it. And the reason why I gave the Chicago Bears an A+, you talked about some of their issues a year ago. The inability to protect their young quarterback. Caleb Williams, who, oh, by the way, is a mobile quarterback, was the most sacked quarterback in the National Football League. Never had an opportunity to really show what type of talent he is at the quarterback position because the offensive line was so bad. So what happens with the Bears? They try to find a way to improve, and they did so dramatically. You talked about Drew Dahlman, a talented center, right, that has experience. Joe Thuney, a champion, a talented interior lineman as well. They revamped the offensive line to improve the offense also with their quarterback. That's the first key ingredient to helping your young quarterback flourish and develop. Not to mention adding some more pieces on the defensive line. Dayo from the Indianapolis Colts, edge rusher, high potential guy. Grady Jarrett, a leader in the locker room, on the football field. Not to mention he has really, really good tape when healthy. That's the free agents, notable signings. But then you look at the draft that we highlighted over last week, right, a week ago. going to get one of the more coveted tight ends in the game and Colston Loveland with their first pick. One thing I would never do, Haley, DK, I would never question Ben Johnson's ability to identify what's best for his offense. If that was his guy, if Colston was his guy, he's going to make it make sense. So I can't wait to see exactly what they have in store in terms of utilizing Colston Loveland. Oh, by the way, Cole Kmet, who is also there as well. You look at Luther Burden III in the second round. I can visualize Luther being the Amon-Ra St. Brown type of talent within their offense because of his athleticism and what he does when he has the football in his hands. You look at Zy Frazier, who I love. You look at Tariq Woolen. He's Tariq Woolen, but a little more refined in terms of what he does, but he has the length and he has the speed. Tariq Woolen, who plays for the Seattle Seahawks. I love everything about their draft. And I love everything about free agency. Because of that, they added pieces that instantly improves their team. And because of those things, I gave them an A+.
A+, man, you are. I wish I had you as my professor back in the days in Tallahassee, giving out those A+. I think it's a really strong offseason for the Chicago Bears. The only thing I will say, and this will be time will tell, and I agree with you have to trust your coach, your front office with personnel and what that fits best for what they want to do. And maybe that's the case with Colston Loveland being better than Tyler Warren. But let's see what happens the first couple years. Let's see how their careers pan out. It could be one that if Tyler Warren does and has the production he had out of college, where it could be, man, what we could have had. But that's the best part about this. Time will tell. I agree with you on Luther Burden. He was a guy at one time, was rated the top receiver in the class. Mizzou's a little bit down last year, didn't have quite the quarterback talent that some of the other receivers had. Shamar Turner's a player I really like a lot out of Texas A&M. Shamar Stewart was the one who got drafted in the first round without the production. Well, meanwhile, Shamar Turner was the guy that was getting the production. And then I also like to add some depth to the backfield. Kyle Monungai, their 7th round pick, was a running back out of Rutgers who led the Big Ten in rushing a couple years ago. So I love the pieces, but I do think it puts a ton of pressure on Caleb Williams. You mentioned the additions on the offensive line, revamping the interior of that line. I think Ben Johnson's going to give him a run game. Now Caleb Williams has to go deliver. But as far as the offseason grade, I like where you have it. Maybe a little bit higher than I would, but I think an A or an A- is absolutely where they belong.
Well, and something you mentioned, Danny, the backfield, there's also reports swirling that Nick Chubb could potentially be added to the Bears' backfield as well, too. I know he's coming off injuries and all the things, but to your point, Ben Johnson certainly trying to make a statement there in year one. All right, we got an A+ off the top. Let's see if we can keep the good grades rolling here, Professor B-Mac. We'll move on to the Packers, who we know hosted this year's NFL draft. We saw crowds come out in droves to watch Green Bay take their first skill player in over 2 decades, taking Matthew Golden, the wide receiver. But B-Mac, still a lot of questions looming here, including the future of fellow cornerback Jair Alexander. So what's the grade here, B-Mac?
I gave the Packers a B. Let's start with the free agency additions. I love Aaron Banks at the guard position. He's a guy that has the experience, not to mention the consistency that you would like to have on your offensive line, pass blocking, run blocking as well. I love that addition. I'm a bit concerned about the Nate Hobbs addition. You gave him $48 million. He's more of a slot corner. He's been playing the slot throughout his career. I don't visualize him moving outside. So if you're telling me he's only playing the slot, the nickel corner, $48 million is a real high price to pay for a guy. Over the last 3 years, he's only played in 16 games, and he's never played in a full season. He's always been dealing with injuries. So I'm a bit concerned. They didn't really address in terms of adding more edge rushing depth throughout via free agency. They did so in the draft in terms of, you look at Colin Oliver from Oklahoma State, a smaller size backer who's shown the ability to rush off the edge, but I visualize him being more of an off-the-ball linebacker. And oh, by the way, he's had injury concerns. Matthew Golden, I love that pick. The issue for me, Danny, Savion Williams in the 3rd round. He's more of an offensive project. He played wide receiver at TCU. He played running back. He was moving around so much. He never got an opportunity to master either or. So with him going in the 3rd round, what is the game plan for Savion Williams? Because you don't have time to wait and see, can he figure it out? You need to know you have a great game plan for him to figure out, to be able to execute and help your offense become better. So those are the concerns for me. When you look at what they're chasing in their division, you never can have enough edge rushers, and the same can be said for corners. I really felt like they could have improved in those areas a little more. And like I said, that 3rd round pick is the guy who I believe they're going to try to figure things out as they go in the midst of the season. For Green Bay, you have no time to waste. You have playoff aspirations that you're trying to create to become championship aspirations, and every pick should matter, especially in terms of the first 3 picks. So I gave them a B.
Yeah, it's one that doesn't really flash as like one standout person. I think it would clearly be Matthew Golden. They mentioned not having that wide receiver taken in 20 years. You saw the fan reaction there. I think that was even more than just the fact that it was Green Bay's pick, but the fact it was a wide receiver. You saw a lot of fans, with the outpouring of energy and support for him. And I actually thought he was one of the top receivers of this class as far as talent and what he did. And I love that he went out and Isaiah Bond, who was supposed to be the guy for Texas, ends up not even going drafted. Matthew Golden kind of overtakes them and really has a great year this past season for the Texas Longhorns. I also like Belton. They're one of their picks that they took there in the second round from NC State. Tackle's really talented. Brinson, the defensive tackle from Georgia, I think provides some value up front on the defensive front. I think the reason it's just not resounding with a lot of people is it's really not that splashy. And this is one where you kind of have to trust these were a lot of role players and players that fit need for what the Packers need to do after being able to feel like they kept hitting their ceiling and couldn't get past, the playoffs. So I'm curious to see what this one goes. I would probably put it a little bit lower, maybe a C+, B-, but the Matthew Golden pick I love and is definitely my favorite addition this class.
One of the most underrated parts of the draft was when Matthew Golden took the stage and he went up to the podium and he's like, Packers on 3, 1, 2, 3, and none of the fans knew what to do because they're so used to hearing that go back go. So hopefully he gets that sorted before he gets out to training camp. Let's talk about the Vikings. All eyes on J.J. McCarthy. We know the GM, Kwesi Adolfo-Mensah, spared no expense financially in his first offseason to improve last year's playoff collapse. And I don't need to remind you two, but for those at home, if you remember, they gave up an NFL record 9 sacks on Sam Darnold in that season finale against the Rams. BMAC, in total, the Vikings shelled out nearly $297 million in free agency, the second most in the NFL behind only the New England Patriots. Did they spend that money well, in your opinion?
No question. I do believe so, especially knowing this season they will have essentially a rookie quarterback in the saddle in J.J. McCarthy, who was injured his entire true rookie year. So the best way for him to be at his best, improve the offensive line. That's what they did. They got 2 proven starters via free agency on the offensive line in Ryan and Will. I love those moves. Those guys have experience, and they instantly make your offensive line better. Oh, by the way, we can't forget Christian Darrisaw, who was injured, who is their best offensive lineman. He will be back in the unit as well. Defensively, Jonathan Allen, Javon Hargrave, 2 high motor guys that will improve what Brian Flores loves to do defensively with their ability to win their one-on-one matchups. Bringing back Byron Murphy. And another under-the-radar move that I really love is signing Jordan Mason from San Francisco. Remember when he took over for Christian McCaffrey, that offense really didn't miss a beat. Unfortunately, he was dealing with injuries. But now you have Aaron Jones and Jordan Mason, 2 running backs that are different styles of runners, but they can coexist nicely in the backfield. And then when you look at the draft, Haley, DK, they only had 5 picks. So it was imperative for them to hit on those said 5 picks. First round selection, Donovan Jackson. Versatility, played guard at Ohio State, moved out and played tackle, didn't miss a beat. I visualize him playing and being another guard, most importantly, being a day 1 starter. So that improves the offensive line as well. Ty Felton from Maryland. The thing I love about Ty, he gave nice numbers, good numbers with inconsistent quarterback play. He reminds me a lot of my former teammate and former Minnesota Vikings, Mike Wallace, in terms of his speed and his ability to create separation. And another under the radar signing, draft pick that I love, Kobe King from Penn State. An old school type of linebacker that has made the adjustment to be in this new age of football, and he's a big-time playmaker, also could be a really, really good contributor on the special team side of things. So when you look at the lack of picks in the draft, but still improving your team along with what they did during free agency, I give the Minnesota Vikings guys a B+.
I'm with you, B-Mac. I think one thing to keeping your best players, Byron Murphy, Harrison Smith, Aaron Jones, a couple of their cornerstones, they had to keep happy, keep them. Also, not making the mistake. If B-Mac, I was on here the other day giving out a grade for Seattle. I am very concerned about Sam Darnold. I think they made the right decision, tough decision to move on from him and hand the keys to J.J. McCarthy as a rookie. But I think that was one of the decisions they made that was a smart decision, and they filled a lot of positions on there. Totally agree with you on Ty Felton, the receiver from Maryland. He didn't have great quarterback play at all. He can be highly productive. So overall, I really like what the Vikings did too.
I really like what they did too. Both of you guys mentioning as well, both Aaron Jones and Jordan Mason coming over. So again, guys prioritizing the backfield, it seems. Let's wrap up our conversation here talking about the Lions. Guys, they were so close to that first Super Bowl appearance in franchise history, back-to-back seasons, but instead it's the Commanders ending their seasons. We know, B-Mac, that their biggest losses really were the coordinators. Both coordinators headed out for head coaching jobs. When I look at their offseason, though, Professor B-Mac, it just seems like very steady to me. Not too high, not too low. What says you here?
Yeah, I agree with you. They have the luxury of kind of doing things their way because of the talent they have returning. But me personally, I gave the Detroit Lions a B, and here's why. The one area of concern, especially on the defensive side, is depth at the edge rushing position. Also, too, with your star player, Aiden Hutchinson, coming off a season-ending injury. Their first-round pick, when you look at Talik Williams, defensive tackle, he reminds me a lot of DJ Reader in terms of his body size, and the same can be said for McNeil. I understand McNeil tore his ACL, but I'm hearing that he should be ready to go at some point in time early in the year. But Williams is the same guy. You need to find a way to improve the perimeter of your defensive front in terms of edge rushing. I felt like that was more of a need than attacking the interior side of their defense, because Aiden Hutchinson and who we don't know, because they've been trying to figure it out. They haven't been able to figure it out. And like I said, Aiden Hutchinson is coming off a season-ending severe injury, and we don't know how long it would be before he's back to being that dominant player that he was before the injury. Outside of that, I love Isaac at the wide receiver position. They traded up, a talented guy. You know, you look at some of the other additions via free agency. Like I said, DJ Reader brought back Derek Barnes, Tim Patrick now listed as a wide receiver 3. But I felt like they could have done more at the edge rushing position, so I gave them a B.
All right, well, good news is we see them first in the NFL season. They kick us off in that Hall of Fame game against the Chargers. Gentlemen, we certainly appreciate it. The Lions also with the shortest odds to win the division at plus 115, with the Packers at 260 behind them.
Now that the NFL draft is done and dusted, it's time to assess the league offseason today. Today we're focusing on the AFC East, which had 2 teams draft in the top 10. Bills got the farthest. They won the division, made the playoffs, getting the AFC title game, losing to the Chiefs in Kansas City. All right, let's have a discussion on the AFC East. We've got our draft analyst, Ryan Wilson, and 2-time Super Bowl champ, Bryant McFadden. You guys are giving grades for every team so far. Let's start with Buffalo. Ryan, I'm going to give you first word. You're giving a pretty high grade for the Bills here today.
Listen, Tommy, I'm all about the bell curve and making everybody feel good with the summer fast approaching here. But look, the Bills crushed it last weekend in the NFL draft, and they had a pretty good pre-draft process with the free agent signings prior to that. They got Bosa. They signed Josh Palmer from the Chargers. They got Michael Hoyt from L.A. He's going to help along the defensive line as well. And they went into the draft and just crushed every single pick. Started with B-Max guy Maxwell Harrison at the bottom of round 1, the cornerback out of Kentucky. Several picks later in round 4, they got maybe the steal of the draft looking back in 2 or 3 years from now, and Deion Walker, the 330-pound, 6'7" defensive tackle out of Kentucky, Maxwell Harrison's teammate there. He had first-round buzz last summer, had a banged-up season and didn't quite play up to expectations, but he has a chance to be a special talent. And they went all defense, those top 4.5, 5 picks there. They said to Josh Allen, you do the heavy lifting. We're going to make this defense better. You take care of the offense. And it's hard not to love what they've done so far.
I love everything about what Buffalo did as well this offseason. Brandon Beane, once again, a phenomenal offseason game plan. But I didn't go as high as Ryan. I gave the Buffalo Bills a B+, and here's why. Let's highlight the draft, no question. Attacking the defensive side for the Buffalo Bills during the draft was very, very important. And I do believe they will hit on those said players because they were great collegiate players and they have high upside. But the issue for me, Buffalo-wise, they didn't really add any depth to the safety position and, of course, the linebacker position. We all love Matt Milano. We know what type of player he is on the football field in the locker room. But as of late, he's had issues staying healthy. So just adding more depth to the linebacker position, I think inside linebacker position would have been a big need for them, because you never know, based on what we've seen in past years with the Buffalo Bills in terms of the inside backers. And you talked about the free agency. Joshua Palmer, I felt like they could have maybe tried to go get a bigger name, but yet and still you pair him up with Josh Allen, we might see the best Joshua Palmer that we've seen throughout his professional career. You talked about Michael Hoyt, and then we can't forget about Larry Ogunjobi. Two experienced high-level defenders on the front, but both players will be suspended. They're going to first miss the first month and a half of the season, so that clearly will put more pressure on some of the young guys that they drafted. And then in terms of Joey Bosa, when was the last time we saw Joey Bosa healthy? Stay healthy. He's had issues as well staying healthy, but they definitely got better. But I decided to give the Buffalo Bills a B+ instead of going the A route like Ryan.
R-Dub going great, B-Mac going good, but not great. You guys are both in line with this next team. A+ from both of you. And B-Mac, I'll give you first word. The Patriots, one of the big things coming into the draft was they had a lot of salary cap space. They spent most, not all of it, but they spent most of it. So after the draft, why are you so high on what the Patriots have done this offseason?
They nailed it. They nailed it. And I'm going to say this right now, Tommy and Ryan. If the AFC East, if they're not careful, the New England Patriots could be the second best team in their division, especially if Drake May continues to take steps in the right direction. And here's why I feel that way. You talked about having the most money in terms of cap space. They didn't spend they wasn't careless in their spending. They made strategic moves. Let's hit on the free agents in terms of what they did. Brought back Stephon Diggs. Clearly he's healthy. Clearly he's highly motivated to continue to have an outstanding professional career. In comes Mac Hollins. You add depth to the offensive line and Morgan Moses. But look at the defensive side. That was an area of concern for them. Milton Williams, the most coveted interior defensive lineman, you brought him in. Harold Landry, a double-digit sack guy, and of course he's familiar with Coach Vrabel. Robert Spillane, off-the-ball linebacker, three-down type of player. Carlton Davis, hit after hit after hit. And then Will Campbell, the best lineman in the draft. Travion Henderson, one of the more explosive running backs. You got him in the second round. I love Kyle Williams, especially his ability to create separation. Joshua Farmer in the fourth. They had an abundance of picks and an abundance of money, and they made sure every move they made improved their team instantly. And for that, those reasons, I gave him an A+.
Tommy, I'm surprised B-Mac didn't bring up the assistant trainer they hired, too, because that guy's going to have an impact on what they're doing. He talked about the list of players. And, look, I think it comes down to this, and I think B-Mac is exactly right. If you mess around come December, January, this team might have double-digit wins. And I think it starts at the top with Mike Vrabel. Elliott Wolf, obviously, still the GM there. But Mike Vrabel appears to have changed the tone in that locker room in terms of what the expectations are. And he has done more with less in previous stops in Tennessee, and this feels like he's got his franchise quarterback, and all they're doing now is building around him. The last few drafts, they refused to take an offensive tackle. They did that in Will Campbell. We saw Will Campbell's speech after he was selected. He feels like a Hall of Famer just on that speech alone, Tommy. So the arrow's pointing up, as Mike T likes to say about the Steelers, and I feel pretty good about this Patriots team who hit the slide in that post-Tom Brady era.
You get your quarterback and you build around him. All right, let's get to the Jets. B-Mac, you're a tough grader here. A solid B for New York.
Solid B for me. Pipe down, Jets fans. Let me explain why. When you look at the first-round selection, clearly showing up the right side of the offensive line, Ahmed Mimbo was the best option. Definitely a top 10 talent with a high upside. Mason Taylor, I love this game, including the tight end production was something that has been lackluster as of late for the New York Jets. A.Z. Thomas, of course, anytime you get a cornerback from Florida State and he's wearing that number 8 jersey, you better believe he's a baller. The question mark for me, Ryan, Arian Smith in the 4th round. I felt like there were more polished wide receivers that were available, and they decided to go with a guy who clearly has speed, but he was a bit inconsistent, especially in terms of being a reliable pass catcher throughout his time in Athens. So I'm a bit concerned because when you look at what they did via free agency, hitting on Justin Fields, especially for that price, was a great deal. But outside of that, they don't have playmakers at the wide receiver position besides Garrett Wilson. Alan Lazard has an abundance of experience, but do we consider him to be a game breaker, a playmaker? No. So I felt like that was an area of need, especially having a new quarterback in the saddle in Justin Fields to really help his development within the offense. I love everything else they did, but in terms of not really identifying and adding a legit playmaker, either via free agency or via the draft at the wide receiver position is a big concern for me. And because of that, I basically gave them a B.
Yeah, they had the lowest grade of any team we'll talk about in this division. They gave an A-, and let's be honest, that minus was probably due to us working with Rick Spielman. That was a Rick minus there. So maybe if we're being honest, it's closer to B-Max B. But the other thing to keep in mind, and B-Mac talked about Isaiah Thomas, the cornerback they took long, fast, physical, and he is fast. I know he ran a 4.58, but the GPS time on him was closer to 4.4, and I thought that's how he played. But I also have I'm of the same opinion as B-Mac about the Arian Smith selection in the 4th round. If you're looking to get a speedy wide receiver, Arian Smith checks one box, but he had 79 targets and 10 drops, which is a box you don't want to check when you're looking for guys at the top of day 3 to be difference makers, especially, as B-Mac noted, you have Garrett Wilson. Yeah, you signed Josh Reynolds, but is there going to be any difference makers outside that's going to scare a defense? And they weren't quite as active, Tommy, in free agency as some of the other teams in this division. Yes, they got Justin Fields. Offensive line's going to be better. I like those things. But as we sit here, I think they've done the least of any of these teams we'll talk about in the AFC East.
Okay, and then we end with the Dolphins, where BMAC is a much lower grade than Ryan. And Ryan, you've already declared you lived on A Street, so what, an A for the Finns here?
Yeah, you know that. Come on now. We got to give it an A. I love the Kenneth Grant pick. B-Mac's angry about that Kenneth Grant pick because he wanted it at 21. That's one thing. He wanted the Steelers to get Kenneth Grant, so you may have dinged him for that, Tommy. But the draft, Jonas Savaiinaea, they traded up, had to give up some assets to get him draft-wise, but he's a day-one starter, and they needed that because Tua Tagovailoa, for as good as he is also injury-prone, and when he's not on the field, that team looks completely different. Dante Trader and Jason Marshall, they got some depth in the secondary. I love those players. Not only Gordon doesn't look like a prototypical Mike McDaniel running back, but he's a between-the-tackles guy who gets in the open field and you don't catch him. Now, they got Ashton Davis, got Ife Melifonwu, they got James Daniel in free agency. Those were the big names, and those aren't quite as splashy as some of the other ones we talked about. But I give them an A because I think they're going in the right direction as long as you keep Tua upright. Now, if that doesn't happen, they could, in fact, be the worst team in this division.
And that's why I gave the Miami Dolphins a C+, because it's about keeping your quarterback upright. When Kenneth Grant was drafted top 15, 13 by the Miami Dolphins, it kind of shook up the draft a little bit because the projections didn't have him going that high. But that was an area of need. But what was more of a need for Miami, the O-line or the D-line? I felt like it was the offensive line because what we saw last year with the Miami Dolphins, when they were dealing with injuries on the offensive line, they had no depth. And because of that, the running game wasn't there. And if the running game isn't there, clearly the passing game would be inconsistent, and that's what we saw. You talked about going up, trading up to go get Jonah. Yes, they knew that was a big need, but you only got one offensive lineman in this draft. Only one offensive lineman in this draft. You took 3 defensive tackles. Hopefully, it better work out well for Miami because if they don't, if the offensive line is not together, they don't have anything offensively. And then the thing about this grade with Miami, they're already trying to trade Jalen Ramsey. What did they do in terms of becoming better at the cornerback position? They drafted Jason Marshall from Florida, but you look at some of the other names, especially if they trade Jalen Ramsey. Stormed up. Cam Smith, who I love coming out of South Carolina, but still unproven. I talked about Jason Marshall, Ethan Bonner. Names that we haven't learned yet because they haven't cemented themselves in the National Football League or better yet for the Miami Dolphins. And if you're a team that has playoff aspirations like the Miami Dolphins will have, you need to find a way to improve the personnel and the talent side of things. And I felt like they dropped the ball in doing so via free agency and, of course, throughout the draft.
Great stuff, fellas. I just would love to have Ryan in community college. I would have gotten done a lot faster than 4 years. Appreciate you, fellas.
And up next, with the draft behind us, still plenty of things up in the air this offseason. Ryan Wilson with 5 potential trades that could really shake things up.
In the NFC East, the division winners and Super Bowl champs, the Philadelphia Eagles, they had a solid offseason. There weren't any major splashes like the addition of the 2024 NFL Offensive Player of the Year when they got Saquon Barkley last offseason, but they were able to keep most of their championship core together, still finding some value in the draft. So the 2 avenues to improve the NFL rosters, they're pretty much now in the books. So free agency, the NFL draft, Now, a key trade, of course, could go down. There are some NFL vets that are still on the market, but for the most part, rosters are pretty secured, which means it is a perfect time for us to assess how the offseason has gone for these teams. We got Pete Prisco and Lige Juzabel here joining us with offseason grades. And Lige, this is your moment. This is all about your grades, and then Pete is going to dissect them, which I gotta love.
I probably agree with him, though. I think.
We'll see. We'll see. We're going to start with the Eagles. Philadelphia did a really good job retaining a solid number of their championship team. Walk us through what they did right and what your overall grade is for this offseason.
Yeah, JD, we were just talking with Pete about earlier how essentially on the offense, everybody is back except for Mekhi Becton. So anytime you can bring everybody back from a championship winning team, it's a good looking offseason for you. On the defensive side, right, being able to get an all-pro to sign back in Zach Bond, which was an amazing signing because when you look, there could be issues at the linebacker position. Jahad Campbell, who they took in the first round, I know he's coming off shoulder surgery. Will he be ready? Now, everything I've heard, he could be ready for training camp, but let's not forget Nakobe Dean had a torn patella tendon, and he most likely will not start the season ready. So could there be some issues at the linebacker position? Yes, they lost a lot of people this offseason. You see it, Josh Sweat, Brandon Graham, Milton Williams. But I like some of the low-end free agent pickups they had in Azeez Ojulari, also Josh Uche, who's not on this list. And then that trade, Kenyon Green, they traded C.J. Gardner-Johnson, but they got Kenyon Green in return. But look at this, Andrew Makuba, he's going to fill that void for what C.J. Gardner-Johnson
He'll compete with Sidney Brown.
With Sidney Brown, who they really love as well. Right. But, you know, sometimes they use a 3-safety set as well, so they'll bring him in as well. I also like Mac McWilliams. He's a guy that has flexibility to play on the outside and in the slot. So I gave the Eagles a solid B for this offseason. They didn't bring any gaudy names, but they retained one of their better defensive players, and they didn't really lose anybody on offense.
No, they've had a good offseason, and Howie Roseman knows what he's doing. Let's be real. I mean, look, he's done a great job drafting. He's done a great job signing free agents. He knows when to let guys go. They traded Chauncey Gardner-Johnson. Everybody said, well, why? Well, because they know they got Sidney Brown, now they got Makuba. They didn't need him anymore. So I think that's the biggest thing about the Eagles is Howie Roseman has done such a great job really stockpiling this roster with young players.
So you agree with a B?
Yes. That's it. Actually, I might be a little higher. I might give it a B+.
Yeah. Okay. This next team got a B+. The Commanders, they reached the NFC Championship game in Jaden Daniels' rookie season. I don't think any of us expected for them to have that rebuild quite as fast as they did. They did make a couple of big trades this offseason. Grade. Yeah,
I gave them the B+, right? They traded for Deebo Samuel. Also getting Lermy Tunsil at left tackle was amazing. Now, their head scratcher on this list was Javon Kinlaw, you know, because they lost Jonathan Allen and they replaced him with Javon Kinlaw and they're giving them $15 a year, which lets you know he's going to be the guy from day one. But they had a home run draft. We talk about taking Josh Conerly, who can moonlight at left tackle or right tackle. So he can even maybe play some guard for you because he did that at the Senior Bowl as well.
Well, he ain't playing left tackle.
No, but right tackle is a possibility. I know Wiley's there, but he could compete with Wiley and potentially start this year. But Trey Amos was a home run pick in the second round. I actually talked to GM Adam Peters, and I was like, I had this guy as a first-round pick. He said, dudes, so did we. And he fell all the way to the bottom of the second round for him. What it allows him to do is Mike Sanderstill, who's one of the better slot corners, it allows him to go back in the slot. So now you have Marshawn Lattimore on the outside and Trey Amos on the outside as well. And they also signed Jonathan Jones, who's a veteran guy that played a lot of years, championship pedigree with the New England Patriots. So I gave them a B+ for adding two guys via trade, but I really love what they did in the draft as well.
I would probably give them a B, and the reason I say that is I'm not usually a big guy who believes in getting rid of draft picks for veterans because I think that comes back and bites you at some point. The Tunsil trade I understood.
Correct.
I think they made that Tunsil trade with the idea they weren't going to be able to draft a left tackle. So looking back on it, would they have still made the trade if they knew they were going to get Connolly? And because Connolly could play left tackle, and as it is now, he's probably going to compete at right tackle. They might move, you know, like you said, they might move Wiley back to guard. He's played guard before, but it gives them a bunch of Coleman from last year who played left tackle is going to compete at guard. It gives them more flexibility, so I do like it. I don't love the trade for Deebo Samuel. Look, I just don't think he's the same player. He was a little heavy last year. He was slow of foot. Now, if he comes back, he's dedicated. Maybe we'll see how he is. You know, but right now, I don't love that trade.
To your point, they restructured his deal, so he's essentially a free agent. So again, this is a contract year for him. So you would hope you would get the best Deebo Samuel.
Pass rush. Edge pass.
That was my one concern.
It's kind of sitting out there.
Yeah, that was my.
They didn't do it. They lost guys and they didn't do much there. So that's a concern.
Okay, so we're in the B's with those two. How about them Cowboys? That's what we got to ask about. They spent the fewest amount of money in the entire league last offseason. Dallas a little bit more active in free agency in 2025. They had one of the better drafts, you could say,
Yeah,
when it comes to guys, right?
For sure.
Grade them.
C-. And I gave them a C- because Jerry Jones usually doesn't bring in anybody in free agency. Now, they re-signed Osa Odighizuwa, which I thought was big to solidify the interior defensive line. But you see it, Javonte Williams, they re-signed my guy Solomon Thomas. Dante Fowler, who actually had a really good season on edge. We were just talking about the Commanders. He played really well, had double-digit sacks. They re-signed him because he was there before. Kenneth Murray, Joe Milton in the trade, and Miles Sanders. But when you look at that, are any of these pieces key pieces to make you compete with the Eagles right now? And then my biggest concern, Pete, at wide receiver, when are they going to get a running mate for CeeDee Lamb? Now, I know that Jerry Jones loves Jonathan Mingo and he gave up draft capital to get him, but they had a real opportunity to potentially add to the receiving group this offseason and in the draft, and they didn't either. Now, getting to back with what JD said, love the draft. Tyler Booker in the first. Me and Pete's #1 guard. He's going to bring an attitude to that offensive line. Donovan Azaraku was an amazing pick in the second round. They needed some pass rush help. That third pick is where it's at, though, Pete. Suvon Revel. If he hadn't had the ACL,
he'd be a first-rounder.
He would be a first-round pick. And to me, if he's healthy, especially with the issues with Trayvon Diggs and potentially not being ready for the season, that is a massive pick in the third round to get a first-round talent in the third round. So I love their draft. I just felt like they didn't do enough in the offseason to compete with the Philadelphia Eagles.
The receiver spot is glaring to me. I thought they should have addressed it at some point in the draft, and they didn't. But they did get a speed runner, though, who I like. I like
Jaden Blue.
Jaden Blue, man. He can run, and he gives you a home run ability, so that'll help them a little bit in the offense. But I'm with you. I probably give him a B-. But I think because they added a lot of bodies and didn't spend a ton to do it. And that's sometimes the way to go. Their offensive line is going to be much better by just putting Booker in there at right guard. I think he's going to be a physical presence. So I do think they'll be better on the offensive line. But I ping them a little bit for not getting the speed receiver to go with CeeDee Lamb.
Okay, let's finish this off with the New York Giants. One of the more interesting QB rooms coming into the 2025 season. A lot of personalities there. They needed to address their defense. They did in free agency, and of course they did, grabbing Abdul Carter in the draft. Lige, where'd you grade them?
Gave them a B+. They got their quarterback of the future and the plan. I actually just got off the phone with Joe Shane. I was talking to him on my show earlier today. He said the plan is for Russell Wilson to start, right? And they said they had the same plan in Buffalo with Josh Allen until they were getting blown out one game. They put him in, and Josh actually looked good, and they kept him in as a starter. So right now the plan is to sit Jackson Dart and Russell Wilson to be the starting quarterback. But I love what they did in the offseason. Javon Holland, getting Paulson Adebo. Those were needs that they had on the defensive side. And then you get the best pass rusher in the draft in Abdul Carter to pair with Dexter Lawrence and Brian Spider Burns. And then Darius Alexander in the third round was a home run pick. A lot of people didn't think he'd be there. Cam Scottaboo adds some physicalness to that offense.
Yeah, they've had a good offseason. I didn't love the move to go get the quarterback. It reeked of desperation to me. I said that during the draft. I just think when you're sitting there and you're the general manager and you're the head coach and you have Russell Wilson and Jameis Winston, you know you're not going to win that division with those guys or even compete for a playoff spot. So you're desperate. You kind of trade back in and get your quarterback. The question becomes, when does the quarterback play? And if he plays, can he save your job? And that's the question. I don't know if he can, but if he does play and he saves their jobs, it's a great pick. If he plays and he doesn't save their jobs, it's a pick for the next regime.
Time will tell in that one. Lige, great job with that. A very, very good work. And
What'd you get? What was your grade?
B+.
B+.
Yeah, I'd probably give him a little B. Yeah, B.
A B?
You're a happy grader. You're happy.
I gave the Cowboys a C-.
Yeah, you're a happy grader today.
Well, I'm fine with it. I like better grades. Looking at the odds to win the NFC East here, no surprise whatsoever. It is the Eagles that are the heavy favorite.
There is a quarterback competition going down in Indy, and GM Chris Ballard is excited about it. Daniel Jones versus Anthony Richardson. So to remind you how he got here, the Colts drafted Richardson 4th overall back in 2023, but it's been kind of a roller coaster during his time there, plagued by injuries, getting benched at one point, struggling to complete half of his passes last season. But the athleticism is there. Then there's Daniel Jones. The Colts this season signed the former top 10 pick to a one-year, $14 million deal. Although he has experienced his own setbacks at 27 years old, many believe the potential for Jones to be a consistent starter is there. The AFC South offseason grades. Our very good friend is grading it. Tyler Sullivan, he has not been kind so far, handing out his grades, realizing that he is a tough grader. So Tyler Sullivan, let's dive into it. Let's start with the Colts there. We talked about the quarterback competition they have created this offseason. How are you grading the offseason moves for the Colts?
I know, and I guess I'm continuing this path. I give him a C+. I mean, listen, you're passing, right? You're passing. It's fine. You're not, you don't have to get it written home to mom. You're fine. You're still going to see. You'll pass. But overall, I still am a little weary about the Indianapolis Colts. Yes, they raised their floor of arguably their biggest need, which was the secondary last season. It was abysmal. They raised their ceiling by bringing in Charvarius Ward, bringing in Cam Bynum. So you're going to be better there. I have questions now along the offensive line. You lose Will Fries. You lose Ryan Kelly to the Minnesota Vikings in free agency. You drafted a couple of guys last year that could theoretically help fill those shoes, but you just talked about it. There's an upcoming quarterback battle here with the Indianapolis Colts, and the last thing that Anthony Richardson or Daniel Jones needs, whoever wins this job, is poor offensive line play. So for me, that's the sticking point where I go, it's fine. I like what you did in the secondary, but outside of that, I mean, Tyler Warren's great, but if there's no pass protection in front of either of these quarterbacks, it's not really going to make much of a difference.
Okay, so what was it? C+, C-?
C+. All
right, let's move on to the Titans here. They finished, some may call it pathetic. I'm just going to call it measly, 3-14 last season. They did take Cam Ward, #1 overall. That was by far the biggest move. They have a quarterback. There will be another quarterback competition with Will Levis. You know that Will Levis isn't getting back down from that position. How are you grading the Titans?
Yeah, another C+. Man, I guess I am more difficult than I think. Hassel was calling me the nun from his elementary school days, and I think that might be right. But you referenced it. Cam Ward, by far and away, the most important addition that they had this offseason. In their entire offseason, their entire next couple of years are going to be defined by how this pick goes. I kind of felt bad for him during the NFL draft because I don't remember a #1 overall pick quarterback being so much of an afterthought because of the Travis Hunter trade up to #2 by the Jaguars. You have the Shedeur Sanders slide. It feels like we didn't even talk about Cam Ward, but if he is who the Titans hope he can be, that #1 overall pick, well then this is a tremendous offseason. I have my doubts about that, and most notably because they haven't really done themselves any favors to surround their young quarterback with positive play around him. You know, you look at what their big free agent signing was. It was Dan Moore Jr. It was around $80 million that they signed him to. He gave up 12 sacks last season, and just looking at the PFF rankings, that ranked 140th out of 140 tackles last season. That doesn't seem to be great if you're trying to bring in a young quarterback. That's 101 of how to ruin someone. Have them see ghosts, have them be hurried in the pocket, not having them comfortable. So in terms of setting up their young quarterback, not great. So that's why I give him a C+.
I will agree with you. I mean, there have been those splashy moves this postseason, and every team in the AFC South, you look at them, you're like, what did they do again? I mean, it's mainly the draft, and it is the draft, of course, for the Jags. Look, it's a whole new season for the Jags. You got a new head coach, a new GM. You drafted a guy by the name of Travis Hunter. I know, I forgot it for a second. We're talking about so many people. Travis Hunter. Please tell me you're giving this team a little bit more than a C+.
Yeah, I am. They're getting to be. And again, it was a phenomenal NFL draft for them because of the trade up for Travis Hunter. You know, of course, it's a little costly when you're talking about significant draft capital being thrown out the door for a non-quarterback. But I think he's the exception. If he is who we think he's going to be, if he's the player that we saw win a Heisman Trophy playing elite wide receiver, elite corner at Colorado at the collegiate level, if that translates to the NFL, that's worth its weight in gold in the NFL because it's two premier positions. This is a wide receiver star. This is a potential corner star for a team that needs both of these positions. So for me, Travis Hunter is really fun. But overall, the Jaguars were able to fix their offensive line. They were able to bring in Diami Brown, who I kind of was, scratching my head at when they gave $10 million, but they seem to be really high on him. But again, it goes back to Travis Hunter. Very similar to the kind of Cam Ward thing that we were talking about with Tennessee. If Travis Hunter is who we think he is, this Jaguars team is going to be must-see TV. I personally can't wait to see an offense where Trevor Lawrence is under center, and on one side he's looking at Brian Thomas Jr., and on the other side he's looking at Travis Hunter. Now that's going to be fun.
Okay, let me ask you this. Since you're just glowing about the Jags, they still get a B. What would have taken, what did they need to do to get an A? Like, what are they missing?
Yeah, further offensive line, like more stability along the offensive line. They still need to fix their defense a little bit more, and I have questions about their backfield as well. They were able to bring some guys in, but again, not the over-the-top slam dunk offseason. A couple of nice additions, but still, offensive line, defense, secondary, those things still need to be sorted out in a more concrete way.
All right, what about the Texans? They won the division. It seems more of like it was extending contracts rather than bringing in new players. What do you grade the Texans?
Yeah, and that's a B- because, again, you kind of grade on a curve sometimes, right? For teams that are more playoff ready, they're kind of nipping around the heels of the roster. They're just keeping guys like Derek Stingley Jr., Danielle Hunter. You got to give them credit there. But, again, it's not the hardest move in the world. You just kind of keep guys that you thought are going to be core going forward, and those two certainly are. But I do like the additions of C.J. Garner-Johnson. I like Christian Kirk. The thing that brings it down for me, and you see it at the top of the right-hand side there, who they lost, the Remy Tunsil. To me, I would have put this a little bit higher, probably like a B+, maybe even A-, because I like a lot of the guys they brought in. But you lose the Remy Tunsil. That trade to the Washington Commanders still has me the most befuddled of any move that I've seen this offseason. You're not in the business of losing star left tackles or moving on from star left tackles when your offensive line was the biggest issue for you a year ago, and you get rid of the best player along that offensive line. That didn't make much sense to me. Cam Robinson, Ursery, who they took in the second round, that should help cushion the blow a little bit, but overall, that was a very head-scratching move.
We appreciate it. By the way, your Derby name would be Tiny Shock. We're doing Derby names here because we are getting close to the Kentucky Derby. Tyler Sullivan or Tiny Shock, have a great weekend. Thank you so much for talking to us.
Welcome back to CBS Sports HQ. You never know what you're going to get in the NFC South. Although all four teams made some moves in the offseason to try to boost their chances of winning, this has been all Bucs as of late. 4 straight NFC South titles. Maybe a few offseason acquisitions could change that. One of the newer faces, though, is Emeka Egbuka. He was taken by the Bucs at 19th overall, and he is already settling right in. You're looking at video of Tampa Bay quarterback Baker Mayfield showing the ultimate Southern hospitality. He actually picked up Egbuka from the airport and took his entire family out to brunch to get to know him. GM Jason Light saying that Mayfield asked for his number immediately, picked them up, and broke bread with this new offensive weapon. The offensive line, a few of the faces there also in attendance. But certainly an exciting way to start off your NFL career if you're Emeka Egbuka. And let's go ahead and talk about the rest of the division. We're going to hand out some grades as we welcome in our Logan Ryan and Charles Davis. Logan, before we get into the grades, I'm just curious, seeing that video, where does that take you back to? Did you have a draft story or something similar there?
Well, the first thing when I saw that video is the offensive line is not going to miss a free meal. So I knew they were going to be there, especially if Baker's paying for it. It reminded me of my first time going in the New England Patriots building, getting drafted by the Patriots in the 3rd round. I started playing the sport of football in 1999 when I was 8 years old. I believe Tom Brady's first season in the NFL was 2000. So my first year playing was his first year basically as a rookie for the Patriots. And I was so nervous to meet him. I mean, man, I was shaking to see what I'm going to say to Tom Brady. And I looked around the hallway, and he was walking down the hall, and I was going to have to pass him. And, oh, man, my palms started getting sweaty, mom spaghetti. But luckily, Tom Brady came up to me, and he said, hey, you're Logan Ryan, the 3rd round out of Rutgers, right? Listen, man, we really need you. You're going to be a huge help for us. We got a lot of Rutgers guys already. We had the McCourties there and all that. But he said, if you ever need me, I'm here early. You want to pick my brain. So similar to what Baker did, took all the awkwardness, the nervousness. You're doing a jump up, and sometimes you got to pay with your role models. I was playing with Tom Brady, but he did that. Great leader, and that's what that Baker Mayfield story reminded me of.
Man, that's a cool one there. Tom Brady, welcome you to the organization. It doesn't get much better than that. Let's get to some grades, though, gentlemen. Logan, you're going to give us the grade and tell us why. Charles, you'll react to said grade. Let's start with the Bucs, the team that has dominated this division over the last 4 seasons, looking for number 5. The big thing there, we just talked about Emeka Egbuka, but they also locked up Chris Godwin there. Logan, you gave them a C+. Tell us more.
Yeah, I'm an extremely harsh grader, and it's because as an NFL veteran, I don't believe in any of these offseason grades truly. Look at the Bears last year. They got an A++ from everybody in the media. Their coach was fired midway. Well, you got to pump the brakes on this. A lot of this stuff has to be a fit. There's a lot of trust. I live in Tampa. I played for the Bucs. There's a lot of trust in Jason Light. He knows how to get good character guys that love to play ball, and that's a lot of this draft process, right? they make some acquisitions here. Let's start in free agency. Hassan Reddick, a pass rusher, still has some juice. We believe he can come down here and do some good things. I love Ibuka, a good kid, loves the game. Obviously, they're trying to get the most explosive offense in football with him and Tez Johnson. And then Benjamin Morrison. This is a good kid. Todd Bowles coaches his DBs. Benjamin Morrison actually called me after the draft, knowing I live in Tampa, wanted to pick my brain. Who's your trainer? Who's your nutritionist? What do I got to do? What do I need to know? So I think that Bucs legends like Levante David, leaders in the locker room like that, they're getting some good character guys. They got some fits at some good parts. I think they've had a really good offseason so far. But sometimes with these rookies, I'm quick to hand out A's after draft days. It doesn't work like that. I love the Bucs core, and that first-round draft pick gives time for Chris Godwin to get healthy, to get on the field and to rush him back. I expect big offense out of the Bucs this year with some of these acquisitions. And obviously, you know what Todd Bowles wants to do on defense is pressure the quarterback.
And Logan, giving harsh grades, tough grades, that's pretty cool because that's what it's like going from college to the NFL. It's not the easy transition. It's like the re-entry if you're up in a space capsule and you come back into the Earth's atmosphere, the bump that they call it, that can be jarring at times. Todd Bowles played in Washington with Benjamin Morrison's dad. All right, so another connected thread that this Tampa Bay Buccaneers team has. Obviously, Baker welcoming him in, and as Logan pointed out, the offensive line will never miss a chance to eat, especially on someone else's dime. But here's what I like about what they've done. They brought in productive college players. Like when you look at each and every one of them, they have numbers. They made things happen for their collective squads. Traits, I like traits. I like production better. That's what Jason Light has brought in here in this draft. Ibuka's going to play right away. Benjamin Morrison's got a chance to jump in there. They don't have a lot of open slots, but they like competition. Morrison and Jacob Parrish at the corner will compete. I think Parrish would be a backup, maybe possibly look at the nickel spot. But all in all, production. That's what I like about what they've done. And keep an eye on David Walker. Central Arkansas, small college guy, but boy, 30-plus sacks in college. There's a guy named Shaq Barrett with similar physique that got things done for Tampa previously.
I do want to say that C+ is the highest grade that we are handing out in this segment. So let's move on to the Falcons, who got a C from Logan. Obviously, the big things that we're looking at here, Michael Penix taking over for Kirk Cousins, so it'll be his first chance at the starter there. They also extended that fifth-year option to Drake London. Why the C here when it comes to the Falcons, Logan?
Listen, nobody's getting over a C in my class. C+, the best you're going to see in this one. You don't win the NFL in the offseason. You just don't. And we've been mentioning that. Look, they found Michael Penix Jr. They found their quarterback. That is key. That is essential. What you're doing with Kirk Cousins, I have no idea. They went after pass rush. They went after pass rush hard, obviously, in this offseason. They had the second worst pass rush in the NFL last year, second worst in sacks. How they address that? Trade all their picks to get Jalen Walker and James Pierce Jr. Those are the guys they had targeted. They're going all in. Those guys are going to have to produce. It is hard to count on rookies right away in the NFL. There is a process where you got to get to it, but they're going all in. They only had 5 draft picks. I do like Xavier Watts as well out of Notre Dame, the safety there. I think he's a good player. But the Falcons went all in. They went all in on this draft. They didn't do much more after this. They found their quarterback. They have a Kirk Cousins situation. He'll probably be on the team this year. I'm not sure how they handle that. The offense didn't change that much. They went all in to address this pass rush, and obviously they got Leonard Floyd as well in free agency. So they're going all in to have a dominant defensive line. They need to. When you have a young quarterback, hopefully you run the ball with Bijan Robinson, and then you sit there and rush the passer to try to play defense. So that's what they went in. It's got to work because of how much picks they gave up to go after those pass rushers.
2 years in a row, Terry Fontenot as the GM was bold. So we're hoping that fortune favors the bold, right? Penix last year when no one expected it. And this year, not just getting Jalen Walker in the first round out of Georgia, but doubling down and coming back into the first round and giving up a 2026 first-round pick for James Pierce from Tennessee. Logan, as you remember, the last real good pass rusher the Falcons had was Vic Beasley, and he was a one-year wonder, 15.5 sacks, 7 forced fumbles. Before that, it was John Abraham, who was one of those 4 Jets that were drafted in the first round, what seems like an eternity ago. So Atlanta fans have been looking forward to this. Terry Fontenot gave them 2. I'm with you on Xavier Watts. I'm also with you on Billy Bowman, the safety out of Oklahoma, who I think they're going to play at the nickel instead of playing him as a pure safety. Both of those two, ball hawks. So I really like what Atlanta did in this draft. I know the grade is a C because Logan, our professor, is going to make you earn it.
I don't know that I want to ever be in Logan Ryan's class, honestly. I was a straight-A student growing up, but I feel like his course might be just a little bit difficult there. Let's talk about the Panthers, who were given a C-. Of course, the big thing with the Panthers last year was Bryce Young getting benched. It seems like they're still trying to buy into him a little bit here, Logan. Got Tet McMillan in the draft here, but tell us more about your C- when it comes to the Panthers.
Yeah, I think we're getting to the point where I'm not completely understanding what these teams did and why they did it. But look, they have Dave Canales. I think he's a really good head coach. Nothing but great, remarks for him throughout the league. People love him. He's obviously built there and brought there to get the best out of Bryce Young, and that's what he's stuck with, and that's what he wants to do. And he's gotten better throughout the year. You saw the last 3 starts there. So what do? Dave Canales comes from Tampa Bay. Gets him Tet McMillan, his version of Mike Evans. Perfect, the big body receiver across from another big body receiver in Xavier Legette. However, when I hear a receiver tell me, a rookie wide receiver or a drafted wide receiver, say he doesn't watch a bit of film, doesn't like watching film study, that is going to be a tough transition in the NFL. If you're going to guard number 1 or go up against number 1 cornerbacks, you're going to have to start watching film. There's a lot more coverages out there he's got to figure out, a lot to learn. So they got to get him to buy in. Not saying he's not. I'm saying you're not going to get away being a big body wide receiver in the NFL without watching film. They had the worst defense in football last year. Absolutely. One of the worst ever. Look at the stats. Look at the numbers. We focus so much on the quarterback play. Everything is last. 400 yards per game, 6 yards per play. The rushing defense, all that's bad. I sat in a lot of defensive meetings. This gets you fired. Absolutely. So what do? Free agency, they attack it, bring in 2 new safeties in Trevon Moehrig and Xavier Woods. Obviously, lock up J.C. Horn for a long time. A very, very good corner. When he got that money, every top corner went to their agent and said, I need a raise, because he shouldn't be getting paid more than every other corner in the league. So he's getting everyone a raise, and we like that. So they addressed it. They addressed their safety position. They addressed their secondary and free agency. They got the big receiver, but it's not the big key free agents that you think is going to make a huge change here. So I got to see what they're doing. I like the coach. They got the young quarterback, but they have a lot of questions to address to be competitive this next year.
And Logan, fortunately for Dan Morgan, their GM, they had a lot of picks that they could use this year, and they had to use them. They're going to get Derek Brown back. They're Pro Bowl defensive tackle. They're going to try and build around him. So I'll start on the defensive side first. Getting Skirton in the 2nd round. He was a guy that when he plays at 260, 265, I think that's when he's at his best. He got up to about 280, 285 last year, became more of a base end rather than a rush end. They need him rushing the quarterback and getting after people. He's going to get a chance to play early, and it should be ahead of Jadeveon Clowney before too much longer. Princely Umanumelen out of Ole Miss, formerly of Florida, another edge rotational guy that'll jump in there and play for them. I really like Lathan Ransom, the safety that's going to come in and play. Logan, I think he will eventually play next to Merrick. I think they'll be the starting safeties before too much longer. Cam Jackson is a monster rotational defensive tackle. Let's see if he can get himself in shape so he can give him a few more plays. That's what I liked on defense. On the offensive side, you had to take care of the quarterback, right? You pointed out getting Tet McMillan. Smaller quarterback, you want bigger targets. Inaccurate quarterback, although Bryce Young is usually accurate, but inaccurate quarterback, big targets. That's what Tet McMillan gives them outside. I like that. Legette's got to catch the football. If he does, that thing jumps up for them. Trevor Etienne at running back, that's hedging your bets. Chuba Hubbard got hurt last year. Jonathan Brooks is going to be out again with a knee injury. They had to bring in someone to give them some help, and they're hoping that he can provide that along the way. The guy I'm going to keep an eye on is Mitchell Evans, the tight end. They've been trying to get tight end right for a while, haven't they, Logan? Mm-hmm. Mitchell Evans is going to end up getting him in the 5th round. He's going to press for playing time because he's a good combo player and catches the ball, moves better than what I think people expect. So all in all, Dan Morgan had a lot of holes to fill and a lot of needs. He tried to address them in this draft.
Shout out to Chuba Hubbard last year for saving my fantasy team. I quite literally put the team on his back last year, and he carried me quite a far way. So we'll wrap up our conversation here, guys, by talking about the Saints. Quarterback issues aplenty when it comes to them. We don't know the status of Derek Carr as he's dealing with another injury. They did draft his potential replacement in Tyler Shuck. Logan, but new head coach Kellen Moore will start his career with a C- as his offseason grade.
Yeah, and this was inevitable. Not his fault. This was coming for a long time. The Saints roster's been aging. They've been kicking the can in terms of repaying guys and restructuring guys, and now you got to pay the bill. Not able to get too active in free agency. The worst news of the Saints offseason, I don't care, is Derek Carr's injury. I mean, when your star quarterback, the guy that you've invested all this money to want to be the face of the franchise, comes in, not playing extremely well, but playing good enough, capable starting football to then have an injury where he might not be ready to play right away or might not play much this season, that is jarring. This is going to be all on Tyler Shuck. This was the choice that they made in this draft. This guy's going to be compared to Shedeur Sanders and some of these other quarterbacks for quite some time. That was a shocking pick. Kelvin Banks got the offensive line ready, got a great offensive lineman there. That's the safest thing to do. Try to run the ball, try to make it easier. But you got Spencer Rattler, Tyler Shuck competing at starting quarterback right now in this division and try to take off the Bucs from the top there. You look at their acquisitions in free agency, Isaac Yiadom, Justin Reed. They bring back Chase Young. They bring back Brandon Cooks. This looks like free agency from 3 years ago. Weren't these guys Saints before? So I don't know what they're doing there, but they didn't have a lot of options to work with. They didn't have a lot of money in free agency. And obviously this was, I think, a shocking pick for a lot of people in the draft there to choose this quarterback third in this draft class. But we will see. Kellen Moore knows how to evaluate quarterbacks, or he was a quarterback. So this is the guy they put their money on. But they did not go out there and splash it up. This was not a splash offseason for them. They are trying to put bandages on bullet holes right now over there in New Orleans and try to do the best they can because this has been coming for a long time.
Well, Professor Ryan, I'm going to tell you right off the top, you remind me of a professor I had in college. I handed a paper one time and got it back. You know what it said at the top? This paper is so bad that I failed not only you, but everyone that looks like you. So I understand this tough grading. So I get it. Here's the deal. Kelvin Banks coming in at tackle. Talisi Fuaga was their choice last year, first round at tackle. One of them's going to play left, one of them's going to play right. It looks like they can move Banks to left and take Fuaga, last year's left tackle, move him to right tackle. Logan, does that not sound like Mickey Loomis over the years, drafting for offensive line as he did for Sean Payton, making sure they're secure there? Then you get Shuck, and I think you're right. He's going to be the tail of this draft for them. Can he come in and compete right away? Because Spencer Rattler's there, Jake Haener's there, Havener's there. He should be the guy that just should emerge. 3 schools, 4 degrees, 26 years old. He's got to be able to go right now. Going deeper into this draft, I think they drafted guys that are going to take over in the future because you mentioned an aging roster. Well, his secondary is Justin Reed and Tyron Mitchell. So you draft Jonas Sanker, who I really like out of the University of Virginia. At linebacker, Demario Davis is the ageless wonder. He keeps going. But at some point, so they get Danny Stutzman out of Oklahoma. These guys should be ready to go. Quincy Riley deep into the draft, a 4th rounder. He's going to press to start on the corner. Tough, hard-nosed kid, very active on the corner. He'll press to do that. But all in all, trying to get it fixed. Here's the thing, though, Logan. In this division, everyone thinks they have hope. Tampa Bay's won it 4 straight years. But they haven't run away with the division since Tom Brady's second to last year in Tampa. Remember, the last 3 years, they were 8-9, 9-8, 10-7. Everyone feels like they can still get there, even New Orleans. I think right now Atlanta's best positioned.
I said it off the top. This division is always crazy, no matter how you slice it up. Guys, I'm giving you both an A+ for your effort here as we grade the NFC South. And as we take a look at the odds to win the division, it is once again the Bucs at +110, looking for their 5th straight division title in the NFC South. The Saints have a chance, but it's quite long there at +700.
Back here on CBS Sports HQ, before we look ahead to the 2025 football season, which we already kind of are, but let's go back and reflect, and let's look at the AFC West, shall we? So we're going to look at free agency and the draft and give out grades for each team. So in KC, we know they got to protect Patrick Mahomes. You saw Joe Tooney leave. They addressed some of that in the draft. As far as the Chargers, we're still trying to see if we can see Justin Herbert tap into his full potential. The Raiders, a lot of change there, paying Max Crosby, getting Ashton Genty, Geno Smith, Pete Carroll, all of that change. But still, the AFC West runs through the Kansas City Chiefs. The Chiefs have won 9 straight division titles from 2016 to 2024. Second most all-time, only behind, of course, the Patriots, who have 11. Let's welcome in Mike Renner and Lige Douzable, and we're going to have Mike give his grades, and then Lige, you're going to react, tell us your thoughts, your feelings on all of it. We're starting with the Chiefs, and as long as you have Patrick Mahomes, you always have a chance. And we saw some issues with the O-line last season. This team still went on to go to the Super Bowl. In the offseason, they lose Joe Thuney, tag Trey Smith. In terms of the draft, they pick up Josh Simmons. So what is the grade with all that in mind and more, Mike?
Yeah, I think it's a B- sort of offseason. I think this team at this moment in time is probably worse for what they lost, right? Joe Thuney was a Pro Bowl guard a season ago for you. Turk Wharton was your only other guy providing interior pressure and probably the only guy who really showed up in that Super Bowl at defensive tackle there. And then Justin Reed was your best safety, probably the second best player in that secondary a season ago. So those are big losses that don't necessarily have easy guys to fill those roles. But I liked what they did in free agency, some budget signings, and Christian Fulton, who I think is an upgrade at cornerback position, Jalen Moore, who gives you at minimum a better play than you had at last season from Kingsley Suamadi there on the left side. So I think those were all like kind of nets out to a net negative. And their draft, it really just hinges on, can Josh Simmons play this season? If the Ohio State offensive tackle with the patellar tendon tear is fully healthy, he is one of the best offensive linemen in this draft class. But that's a big if with an injury like that doesn't have a great track record of success of guys coming back and being their former selves. So that to me is it, is that does this offensive line gel? Do these new additions play well early on? If they do, you know, it's a great offseason because they really weren't in a cap situation to add more talent. But if they don't, yeah, they could be taking a step back from that championship form.
And let's not also forget Rashee Rice is coming off a knee injury where he looked really good in the opening week last year versus the Baltimore Ravens. Looked like he was going to be a true #1 receiver. Xavier Worthy, his second year, you think entrusted or thrust into this offense would be a lot better. I hear what you're saying about Tershawn Wharton, but I love what they did in the second round, right? Getting a guy like Omar Norman Lott, who has a similar skill set to Deshaun Warren, who could really pair nicely with Chris Jones in regards to getting after the quarterback. But like you said, Mike, the big question, Josh Simmons, will he be healthy enough to potentially participate in football this year is a question to start the season. Obviously, they went and got Jalen Moore from San Francisco to try to be that heir apparent at left tackle. But I think Josh Simmons, if he's healthy, could push their right tackle, Jawan Taylor, for starting position at the right tackle position. It would be a major upgrade. So I like the B-.
Yeah, it's a B- from Mike Renner for the Chiefs and their offseason moves. Let's talk about the Raiders because there's a lot of new there, right? They have a new head coach in Pete Carroll, a new quarterback in Geno Smith, a new running back via the draft in Ashton Genty, and then, of course, they still pay one of their main staples in Max Crosby. Mike, how do you assess all of the moves that we've seen when it comes to Las Vegas?
I think they had one of the better off seasons around the NFL. And it comes down to adding a quarterback, adding a guy who's a real franchise quarterback. Maybe he's not a top 5 guy in the NFL, but compared to what Raiders fans have seen of late, you know, since Derek Carr left or even late seasons of Derek Carr there, this is going to be like night and day. It's going to be a massive upgrade for them. And they already had a budding offensive line there. I think down the stretch you saw it with Sincere McCormick running behind that offensive line that it could actually be effective. And now you have even an upgrade over Sincere McCormick. You have what should be one of the top 5 running backs in the NFL in Ashton Genty. That's how good I felt about him as a prospect. And he goes to a great situation to succeed there. So I love this offseason. It's an A- just because you lost a lot from that defense. You know, Trayvon Merrick, Robert Spillane, Divine Diablo, Nate Hobbs, and you didn't have a great secondary to begin with, but I think they'll make up for that by getting Christian Wilkins back healthy, re-signing Malcolm Kuntz, who should be back healthy now. That defensive line should be one of the best in the NFL, so the secondary will play better because of that.
Mike, I love that you went and attacked this team in the trenches because that's where they got a lot better. You talked about it in regards to their defense, right? Mad Max Crosby's coming off an injury, but I've seen some videos already with him participating with the team. He looks like he'll be 100%. Christian Wilkins coming back. Adam Butler re-signing him as well. And I love that you talked about the young offensive line because for some odd reason, people think the Raiders don't have a good young offensive line, which they actually do. So I think Ashton Genty was the perfect pick. We know Pete Carroll's mantra. He wants to run the ball effectively. You got Geno Smith, who's back with Pete Carroll. There's some synergy there. And I love what they did in the second round with adding Jack Betts from TCU. He's going to be a guy that really destroys the middle of the field. I like this A grade for them. I would give him A as well, too.
All right, let's go to the Chargers. And we sort of saw the Harbaugh effect, right, in the turnaround last season. Joey Bosa, he is gone. Got to get used to seeing Najee Harris in a Chargers uniform. But, Mike, where are you at on the Chargers and what they've done in the offseason?
I did not love what they've done. In an arms race now that is the AFC West, where the Broncos got a lot better, the Raiders got a lot better, I think the Chargers got worse, truthfully, with the additions, or I guess the losses they had this offseason. Joey Bosa walking out the door, franchise legend. Yeah, he couldn't stay healthy, but obviously you would rather have him on that roster than not on the roster. Christian Fulton walking out the door. Poona Ford walking out the door. One of your best defensive tackle additions a year ago was such an upgrade for that defensive tackle position. Now they're really hurting at that position. You're relying on a rookie third rounder to be your savior there. And Jamari Caldwell, easier said than done coming into the NFL. Josh Palmer, not a huge loss, but backfilling that, you know, Mekhi Becton, the offensive line, the running game should be great. I have no doubt about that. But I worry about this defense being able to uphold the form that was a top 5 defense a year ago. A lot of smoke and mirrors. I just don't think they have the horses coming through that door anymore. And in this division, it's going to get tough.
Well, you have to remember, Mike, last year, right, they didn't have the star power when it came to that defense, and that was still a top 5 defense for a majority of the year. So you have to trust in the system. I'm with you, though, as far as up front on the defensive line. They lost too many pieces and didn't supplement those pieces as well. But I really love what they did on the offense. They solidified the guard position with Mekhi Becton and Omarion Hampton to pair with Najee Harris. We know Jim Harbaugh's mantra. He's going to be physical and run the football. So they may run the ball 30 times a game, Mike. They're going to try to beat guys into submission. You see Omari Hampton right there. The first guy never brings him down. Great contact balance. He's also going to help in pass protection. He's one of the best pass protecting backs in this draft class. So really love what they did on offense. I hear your concerns on defense, but just got to go back to last year when they didn't have the star power on that defense. Their defense still played at a high level. So I know you gave them a C. I think I would have gave them at least a B-.
Okay, and finally, let's talk about the Broncos. Mike, I know you said the Broncos got better. You gave them an A+. What did you love about what they did in the offseason? That's the highest grade that we're seeing in this division from you.
This was the best offseason in the NFL, in my opinion. You already had the top-ranked defense in EPA per play. You added to that Talanoa Hufanga, Dre Greenlaw, and Jahdae Barron. You know, you added 3 massive pieces to the back end of this defense, and then a couple guys who I think fit in great onto the defensive line in Q Robinson and Savion Jones, too. So I think that this defense is electric, and then you're just hoping Bo Nix takes a step forward. So if that all comes to fruition, I mean, they could challenge for that division crown if this defense takes a step forward and it's pure dominance.
Mike, I'm so glad you ended your statement by saying that, because that was going to be my first statement. I believe they will push the Kansas City Chiefs for that divisional crown. You talked about it. This was one of the top defenses in football. They led the nation in sacks last year, and then they got better in the secondary with Jahdae Barron. Now, the biggest thing and concern for them is, can guys stay healthy? Dre Greenlaw, Talanoa Hufanga, Alex Singleton, all have dealt with injuries coming off of last season. Can those guys stay healthy? You hope that Bo Nix takes a leap in another year in the Sean Payton offense. Evan Ingram is a guy he's going to be able to lean on in the middle of the field. And R.J. Harvey was the perfect back for Sean Payton, especially because they like to run a lot of G-scheme with Quinn Miners pulling. Just imagine the patience that R.J. Harvey has, and then the explosive ability in the second level. I think he could push for Offensive Rookie of the Year. So watch out for the Denver Broncos. I believe they will push the Chiefs for the AFC West crown this year.
All right, Mike Lige, we certainly appreciate it as we grade the offseason moves for each team in the AFC West. Getting a look at Mike's grades again, an A+ for the Broncos. Both Mike and Lige on the same page there, thinking that they could seriously challenge the Chiefs in the division. The Raiders, Mike is giving them an A-. It's a B- for the Chiefs and a C for the Chargers.
Welcome into a brand new hour of CBS Sports HQ. Jenny Dell here on this Tuesday afternoon. The NFL draft, well, it's come and it's gone. It is now time to dissect what we saw out in Green Bay. In the first round, we all knew Cam Ward was going to go #1 overall to the Titans as their new QB1. What we didn't necessarily foresee, though, the Jags trading up to that #2 spot to get Travis Hunter with the 2nd overall pick. The Giants getting some more pass rush help, taking Abdul Carter, and the Patriots bolstering up that O-line with Will Campbell to protect Drake May. So we have QBs to assess as well, other top picks to break down, and proven NFL stars still getting deals done. That's for sure. The 49ers have reached a new deal with George Kittle that will make him the highest paid tight end in league history. Kittle's new deal is 4 years, $76.4 million. That includes $40 million in guarantees. That 31-year-old, he just wrapped up his 8th season with the Niners, where he ranks 3rd in franchise history in receptions and receiving yards. How about a personal message from George Kittle himself?
What's up, guys? George Kittle here. How you doing? I'm doing great. We got that 4-year extension. Gonna be here plus 10 years. Have a good one. A lot of good times. Get the faithful fired up. Don't you just love good 49ers football, sweetie? Let's go.
I love the deep breath in. It's just like, oh, honey, we are so rich now. That's exactly what that breath was all about. Danny Kanell, Mike Renner joining us now on the HQ desk. Let's talk about that George Kittle deal right now. The Niners, they had 3 key players that they needed to lock down looking for new deals. So we had Fred Warner, Brock Purdy, and George Kittle. So getting one of those deals done, your thoughts on it? We expected it to happen. You happy with the amount of money he's getting?
Yeah, I think absolutely. This was the one I thought was the no-brainer, too, for them to get done, for what he's meant to the franchise. And I know Brock Purdy is still a question mark, and at quarterback, it's the most important position of any franchise. But I do think there's some speculation about what type of money Brock Purdy should command, and is there going to be, and he also has another year on his rookie deal. So priorities, I think you have to go with somebody who's been a cornerstone of this franchise. And I don't think it's a coincidence that you look at some of the dynasties of the last 15 years, the New England Patriots and the Kansas City Chiefs. What do they have in common? An incredible tight end that is just a weapon, and that's what George Kittle is. He's probably one of the most complete tight ends in the league with what he can do in the run game and the pass game. And it is a quarterback's security blanket to have that option to go to when you get into trouble. They can look covered, but they have the body size to, body up against smaller guys in the slot, or even against linebackers. They're a mismatch in the speed department. So I love it from this perspective of prioritizing him as the guy they have to bring back and getting this deal done.
Yeah, 100%. In terms of value to that offense, I don't think there's anyone that's more integral to what Kyle Shanahan wants to do in terms of what he can do as a blocker, what he can do as a receiver, and you see that when he misses time. And I'll say, for 31 years old, it is a lot of money, but just look at tight ends and how they've aged. Guys like Travis Kelce, Antonio Gates, Tony Gonzalez over the years, these guys are playing to their mid to late 30s and still being productive. So I'm not too worried about that, given, he's still 31 years old here.
General Manager John Lynch came out and said, in 2017, our first year with the 49ers, we selected a skinny tight end from Iowa who we were really excited about. We had high hopes. No one would know that he would become the player that he is today. So nice to lock that down. Real quick before we move on here, what does this mean for Brock Purdy?
I still think he's probably going to work out a deal, but I think it comes to the conversation of, are you going to try to break the bank and get as much as you can, which his agent probably is encouraging him to do, or are you going to take a little bit of a discount, realizing they do have some leverage where they could pay him $1 million on the last year of that rookie deal, or you're going to get compensated an incredibly high amount of money where you're set for life. You're not one of the top 5 highest paid quarterbacks, but you can have the security and spend some of that money around on guys like George Kittle and others, because they have had to pay a lot, and they still do have to take care of other players. So I would advise him. It was similar to what I thought Dak should have done. Now, Dak Prescott went a different direction. He went and broke the bank, and I think it's a reason why the Dallas Cowboys haven't been very good since he signed that mega deal. It is really complicated when you look at the amount of money that teams are committing to quarterbacks as far as a percentage of the salary cap. I would say don't try to bake the bank. Take a deal that's a little bit of a discounted deal, and the next deal for Brock Purdy could be the one that he breaks the bank. But you want to make sure that you get to that next deal.
Yeah. I think they want to see what Mac Jones looks like. I mean, the reports were coming out that they were super high on him in the draft, and obviously the sort of conversation around Purdy has been, how much is Shanahan in the offense? How much is Brock Purdy? So I think Shanahan and John Lynch, they want to have that little point of comparison to say, are we really going to give $50 million to Brock Purdy if we could get similar production from a guy who we just got for like $2.5 million, Mac Jones?
That's a good point out there. That's a good point. We'll have to wait and see what happens with that. All right, we're going to talk about NFC West grades, okay? This leads us nicely into the Niners. A lot of people out there said that the 49ers had the worst free agency of any NFL team. John Lynch, we were just talking about them. He said, we have a plan. Big things are coming our way. How do you grade him, Danny?
So and this is a combination of free agency plus the draft. And I do think you have to consider what they lost. And losing a player like Deebo Samuel, who has been, one of Brock Purdy's biggest targets and favorite targets on the outside, I think that's a considerable loss. And to replace him with Cooper Kupp, who I do think is a pretty good addition there, I don't know if I trust what they're doing there. I'm sorry, that was a different one. That's the Seahawks. We're doing them next. But with a lack of a guy like a Cooper Kupp or somebody else significantly that can be a weapon for Brock Purdy, I think is a concern. And this is where you have to kind of trust the draft process, because I know they didn't really make a lot of splashy moves. I like the Michael Williams, but they did get a lot of quality guys deeper in the draft. And if you go back to a guy like Jimmy Johnson, who at the Cowboys famously said always, you build the draft, not even in the first round, but it's in the second, third, and later rounds. That's where you sort of have to trust the process with John Lynch, that they're going to get some players in here who may not be the superstar names that come in and can, compete for Rookie of the Year, but they're guys that can be long-term starters and quality contributors on the team.
Yeah, they probably lost more talent than anyone else in the NFL in free agency. It's just that list of names is insane. But the thing is, of those guys, it's really only Charvarius Ward and Aaron Banks that were making an impact last year, that you're going to feel their impact this next fall. And I love what they did in the draft. I think they went in with a plan. The plan was improve our run defense, because they got, for my money, 3 of the best run defenders in the entire draft class, and Michael Williams, Alfred Collins, and C.J. West. So I think, given what they had to do, because they made this bed when they did the Trent Williams extension, the Brandon Ayuk extension, going for the George Kittle extension, they just weren't going to be able to keep all these guys. For what they had to do, I think they did as good as they could have. So I think it's a little bit better than a C+ offseason, just because this was a bed that was made long ago that they were going to have to lose all these guys.
The Jordan Watkins and the Jordan James pick from Oregon, the running back and the wide receiver from Ole Miss. Yeah. I like those are the types of picks that I think are really good value picks that could be significant contributors to the team. Again, they're not going to compete for Rookie of the Year, but they're the type of players that you need production from, and I do think they could get it.
They'll be looking for that production. 6-11 last season, hoping to improve upon that. We're going to actually talk about the Cardinals next. They spent a lot of their money on the defensive side of the ball with their free agency, headline being that former Eagles guy out there, Josh Sweat. So when you think about what they've accomplished, what grade are we giving them? Again, draft and free agency.
So I gave them a B+, and it's no, I think when you have a defensive-minded coach like Jonathan Gannon, you're going to get a lot of that attention, especially last year when they went and got Marvin Harrison Jr. to kind of help Kyler Murray on the offensive side of the ball. But I think Josh Sweat is one of those producers who comes in that can instantly make an impact for them. Also, an older Calais Campbell. I know he's 38 years old, but it was relatively cheap, and he's a player who's coming off 5 sacks, comes back to return to the organization that he started with. I love that move as well. And then the draft, Walter Nolan was a player who started his career at Texas A&M, then goes to Ole Miss. I think he was a 5-star, one of the highest rated defensive players coming out of high school. I love what he can do. And the Will Johnson pick was a guy who was projected to be a top 15 pick. Then he's got some injuries throughout his career this past season, misses some time. If he ends up being healthy, he could be a guy who plays like a first-round pick. So I love the value there. And another one, Jordan Burch, the player out of Oregon. I thought he was one of their best producers. Another guy, injured somewhat, missed a little bit of time with Oregon, but I think there's a great value there. So I like the combination of the pieces they added in free agency, also the draft.
So yeah, I think the Cardinals had the best offseason of anyone in the West. I think they made the most sort of headway in towards getting that #1 spot in that division, because Jonathan Gannon said, screw all this scheme pressure stuff. I want guys that can get after the quarterback one-on-one. And he got that this offseason. Whether it was Josh Sweat in free agency, Calais Campbell, Dalvin Tomlinson, Walter Nolan, Jordan Burch in the draft. Like, he added so many pieces. And then factoring in also the Baron Browning trade late last season that they then re-signed this offseason. They went from probably the last 2 years under Jonathan Gannon, the worst defensive line, or at least like one of the worst defensive lines in the NFL, to now what could realistically be a top 10 unit that goes too deep at every single position.
So we're going to move on to the Seahawks now. I know you wanted to jump ahead and get straight to them. You gave them a C-, Danny. You think about the fact that they traded away their QB1, their top wide receiver over there, but then getting a guy like Sam Darnold.
Sam Darnold, for me, I don't know how Mike feels. It's dragging my grade down. I think there's still a significant amount of risk in a player who had one really good year in a great situation with Minnesota and a coach who basically built an offense and really instilled a ton of confidence in Sam Darnold with great weapons to work with. I mentioned them bringing in Cooper Kupp, but they lose
lose DK Metcalf, who was a massive target on the outside, one of the biggest mismatches. And Cooper Kupp, I like him, and I think he still could have some good years left. I just don't know if he's the type of player that's going to be able to lift up Sam Darnold to the level of expectation of, okay, this is a player who was an MVP candidate. We're going to spend, give him $100 million, a 3-year deal, $100 million, if they're going to get that type of production out and predicting him to be like a franchise guy that can contend for Super Bowls. So that had me very cautious on the Seahawks moves there. Gray Zabel, the kid out of North Dakota State, I think that was everyone. This might have been one of the spots that everybody nailed as far as him going to Seattle. It's probably the least kept secret out there. Nicky Mamwari, I really like that pick, the player who really flashed at the combine and was just lighting up people's draft boards because of what he did there. Elijah Arroyo, tight end out of Miami, I liked him a lot. So I like some of these pieces, but the thing that dragged my grade down was the move for Sam Darnold.
You're not going to give my Jalen Milroe any love there?
What are you going to do with him? That's my thing. And without the time will tell, I do not think he is a quarterback long-term in the NFL. If they utilize him, which I would think if you spend a third-round pick on him, you're going to have a package for him to play right away as an offensive weapon. But what does that look like? Is it sort of, a wildcat-type player who you just use on short yardage and goal line? It might pan out. But if they're thinking that that could be the succession plan if Sam Darnold doesn't work out, I don't think that's the answer.
I'm right there with you on the Seahawks team. They had, for my money, the worst free agency period in the NFL. Whether it was swapping Geno for Sam Darnold, whether it was swapping DK for a 32-year-old Cooper Kupp. And now I just worry about DK was the field stretcher. Like, JSN was great in that offense last year, but it's because people had to pay attention to Geno to DK and the speed he brings to the table on the outside. They don't have that field stretcher anymore. MVS, does have some speed, but I don't think anyone's scared of him at this point in his career. So you have 2 4-6 type of wide receivers, 2 guys who work the underneath and intermediate range, no one who can really stretch the top off the defense. So I'm worried about that. And then in the draft, they go low-value positions, guard, safety, tight end with their first 3 picks. Not to say that they aren't good players. It's just you had 3 top picks. You could have really hit the home run on higher value positions for that team.
A couple of later round, Riley Mills, the defensive tackle out of Notre Dame, who was hurt, injured. I like that pick from a value perspective, getting him late. Damian Martinez, another running back who was at Miami. They got a couple Hurricanes. I think he could be somebody who, if you find great running backs later in the draft, I think he could be somebody that pops for the Seahawks. But overall, just not impressed.
Not impressed. So a team that you weren't impressed with, too, last but not least, a team you were impressed with, and that's the Rams, giving them an A-. I mean, the 2 big moves made this offseason was keeping Stafford, signing Adams. Your thoughts, Danny?
I mean, this franchise doesn't really care about the draft, right? We can admit that. Les Snead famously, his line, which you saw James Gladstone with the Jacksonville Jags take over, that philosophy, it has worked from them. But I'm a big believer in keeping your best players around. And so I thought getting Stafford, rework deal to be able to bring him back when he's been healthy and they started to make some of those changes on the offensive line. I still think he's got, years left to produce and keep this team a contender. And you give him one of the better receivers in the league who's just been in quarterback wasteland with the Raiders last year. You give him sort of an infusion of life to be paired with Matthew Stafford. I love that move. So I think it's an upgraded wide receiver. I love that they got back Matthew Stafford. The Terrence Ferguson piece, I know the tight ends, we were so focused on Colston Loveland and Tyler Warren as the top tight ends. I do like Terrence Ferguson's ability to stretch the field. He was a big play machine. Josiah Stewart out of Michigan, another edge rusher that really made an impact for their offense, for their defense. So I like some of the pieces in the draft, but I think this was all about what they did in free agency for me.
I really like their draft. Honestly, their free agency period was kind of tame in my opinion. I'm not sure it really moved the needle, but this draft, and more specifically, the fact that they got a future first-rounder, because everyone said this quarterback class is, not the one to get a quarterback. But next year's might be all right. And next year aligns with the timeline of getting Matt Stafford's replacement. So they have 2 first-rounders next year to go up and make that move if they should choose. And the guys they drafted are just like perfect Rams. Terrence Ferguson, the comp for him was Tyler Higbee, which then makes a lot of sense, the Rams tight end right now. And then Josiah Stewart, those 6-foot defensive linemen, they got like 3 of them there already for the Rams. Those guys create havoc the way they deploy them in that defense.
You guys, your faces are just lighting up when you talk about this team. Very different than the other teams that we just discussed. We have Mike Renner and Danny Kanell looking at the odds to win the NFC West. So the Rams and the Seahawks, they finished last year 10-7. The Rams were your NFC West champions. Right now, they are the favorite, slightly over the Niners, to go on and win the NFC West. Oh, well, with NIL, decisions to leave the college ranks and head to the NFL can be very difficult. Did Quinn Ewers make the right choice? That's next.